Ladies and gentlemen, it's nice evening. I see we are a lot, so not many seats left unoccupied. My name is Gergely Huszti, I'm an editor, and we have a panel discussion here. Joining me four authors, and we will try to entertain you for at least an hour with reading and some discussion. Let me introduce our guests this evening. First, from left to right, Olga Tokarczuk is coming from Poland. She's thank you. She's a critically acclaimed Polish writer, with her debut novel in '89, and then in '96, next date to be remembered, she gained international fame with her novels. That are also translated to many languages and now available in Hungarian as well. And we're very happy to have her here for the Könyvfesztivál, for Book Festival as well. So we will talk with her. Also we have Ádám Nádasdy next to her. Thank you. Also acclaimed poet and translator of most notably of Shakespeare's plays, but also G.B. Show, and most recently from Italian, also showing in the opera, as I've gathered, and as well professor of ELTE University linguistics. Next to him is Amy Sackville. We have a round of applause as well. Thank you. For the debut novel festival of the Book Festival. Her first novel debuted last year, titled The Still Point. And we will discuss a little bit about that, and as well how she became a writer. As I think in the Los Angeles Times they wrote an accidental novelist. I was wondering how one can be an accidental novelist. We will see. And last but not least, we have Zsófia Bán, also a professor of American Studies, a former professor of mine, and also essayist, critic, and translator of prose. So we are very happy to have them, and I also take a seat, if you don't mind. So basically our aim for today, or the homework, was to talk a little about how we can get to the core, to the heart and soul of a nation through its literary writing, through the texts. But I think it would be much easier to be less theoretical and academic and take a little bit a light-hearted approach to the subject. And I would personally be interested to see your own experience as consumers and producers of texts, be it prose, essay, poetry, drama, of how you consider, or is it important at all to you, how your nationality being represented in texts of your reading and writing. So we have one microphone, we have to share that. I don't want to pinpoint anyone for the first question, but whoever takes it, just grab it.
Well, I think when somebody's Polish, then it's terribly important to be Polish. It seems that Polishness is more important for Poles than many other nations consider their nationality maybe less of a major factor. Is that right?
You mean as a writer or as a human being?
Well, as a human being, and then are writers any different? Are Polish writers less Polish than the other Poles?
What can I say? Polish literature was always very involved into politics in any meaning of politics. and in history. So for many times the Polish people, Polish writers were very interested in Polish history, in the sense that our identity was always being attacked. So we treat literature as something we can improve ourselves as a Polish in our identity. But I think that during the last years it changed very, very much. So for me, for my generation, for instance, it was something released that we could write about other things, about our privacy, our individual life, our fairy tales and so on. So I think that I belong to this generation who are really free from history and from politics. But of course, if you have a look on the classical Polish literature, like Mickiewicz, for instance, it was always connected with nationalistic ideology in a very strong sense. Is it okay?
I think it's perfectly okay. All the more so since I think Mickiewicz was born in Vilna. Is that right? A place which is no longer Poland. And so for Poles it is often very much like Hungarians, you know, people or places that you consider very much your own are no longer politically in the country where you came from. Maybe that's why the language becomes so terribly important. Yeah.
I think it's interesting that you're saying that you feel free to write your fairy tales, because to me I suppose that's where I think of myself as an English writer is more from the literary heritage, and that's where I think of it in terms of my attachment to a nation. And for me that's what's interesting about writing in English, is that it is such a mongrel language. It's so open to new words, and it comes from two roots in the first place. It's the Latinate and then the Anglo-Saxon, and it incorporates words so freely and it's so synonymic, and that's what I love about writing in English. Not that I have a choice, but and I think that's where I identify myself as an English writer, is through the literary history, and part of that for me is the way that English has been returned to the centre, I suppose. So I'm interested in the way that post-colonial literature is fed back into English literature, actually. So I see myself as coming out of a kind of modernist tradition to some extent, and thinking about writers like James Joyce, who are kind of using English in a very different way, a unique way, and trying to reclaim it in a different way.
At the same time, you also, I don't know if you hear this, do we need a mic?
So, but at the same time, you also tell us somewhere that historical preciseness is not embedded in your work. It's not so crucial to you. It's more from the perspective of the reader, that you can carry on and the reader follows you. So it's more from the perspective of the reader than from the historical view. How do you consider these two elements? Because you said you also you have a huge heritage to relate to.
I think this book is set partly at the turn of the 20th century, and it concerns an Arctic exploration, and to some extent I did want there to be historical accuracy, in that I wanted to convey a feel for that period and to try to be as accurate as possible with the details of how that exploration would have happened. But at the same time, as you say, I'm more concerned about the reader believing in that world, whether it's entirely factually accurate or not. And someone pointed out that there's a description of the historical character remembering drinking a gin and tonic on the lawn and remembering the ice between his teeth, and somebody said, well actually they wouldn't have taken ice in their gin and tonics at that time. And I thought, well, I don't really care as long as most readers believe it. I think E.M. Forster said in aspects of the novel, you can more or less do what you like as long as you bounce the reader, as long as you take the reader with you. I think I subscribe to that idea.
You've also mentioned the term modernism, and Olga, I find one of your interviews you stated that you against modernism you do the kind of the postmodernist term of a video clip narrative. Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean by the video clip narrative? If it's still concerns you.
I rather thought that this is, my idea was rather connected with working of our brain. I'm a psychologist from my profession, and I still remember some researches made by psychologists, and they realized that we perceive reality in a small amounts of information. So the long narration is rather something we can imagine only, but we perceive reality in like drops, you know. So I'm also very also a person who became bored very quickly. So I don't like such a long narration. I always feel boring after, you know, some 10 pages of such a long situation when somebody came and sit and she take a cup of tea and then she started to drink. Hello, Margaret, how are you today? I'm fine, she answered, and so on and so on, this kind of telling stories. So my temperament is rather quick and different. I like to, you know, just to put my ideas in short, precise images, and I like puentas in the end of every text. So perhaps this is the question of temperament, that I like to tell a story in such a way.
Let's ask how they react to the first round of the question about the national.
I feel kind of envious that you both are saying that you feel that kind of liberty to be detached from your history and from your literary history, because I think that's something that Hungarian writers have a very hard time with, getting away from it, that is. Because, well, since Adam said that probably Polish literature or Polish writers are the ones that... Sorry, is this okay? Is this better? That probably Polish writers are the ones who feel most connected to their history. I would say there's another literature that feels very strongly connected to its history, and that's Hungarian. And it's something that's, you could say, even it's an expectation, I would say, especially from the point of view of the canon, from the literary canon. If you take a look at the Hungarian literary canon, you will find, well, mainly novels that are very strongly that have very strong connection to history, that have very strong historical perspective, and an expectation for it to be a novel and not fragmented stories or fragmented texts. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that the pressure is very great, I feel, on Hungarian writers to meet that expectation in a way. My work, yes, I do have a very hard time coping with that, because I'm also much more attracted to shorter texts, to to texts that tend to be more fragmented. Even my book of short stories, if you will, can be read as a novel, but it can also be read as a book of short stories, in which the stories can be read as individual stories. So, you know, I've had people saying, "Oh, I've read your novel." Others said, "Oh, I've read your book of short stories." Others said, "Oh, I've read your book of essays." You know, so it doesn't. I think as far as my writerly temperament is concerned, I tend to go against that expectation. Well, you know, we'll see what happens. I mean, in terms of acceptance, and you know, I'm trying to put together my second book. I mean, as a fiction writer, I debuted only in a few years ago, because previously I had written essays, but when I wrote essays, people were always telling me, "Why don't you write short stories, because your essays are so much like short stories." And then some were saying, "Your short stories are so much like essays," or whatever. So what I'm trying to say is that I think that in Hungarian, Hungarian literature has always had a very great investment in its own history, both history as such and literary history. Hungarian texts are always very strongly intertextual, even if they don't have specific texts included, which they often do, especially so-called postmodern writers. Everybody knows that they do that a lot, postmodernist intertextuality and so on. But even when they don't, Hungarian writing is always very strongly reflects on whatever has been written previously. It tends to have a very strong conversation, if you will, with earlier Hungarian literature. And obviously this has historical reasons. As a small nation, Hungary has always, you know, experienced or has always practiced its literature, or has always considered its literature as a kind of repository of national identity. And for that reason, I think, and you know, in a way this is still true, which may sound a bit anachronistic in 2011, but I think it's still very much the situation. Anna? Yeah.
Because some months ago I was in Canada and I talked with a Canadian writer, and she told me one thing which I wasn't aware before. She told me that writing in Canada or in States, which are a very multicultural society now in a global world, you have to be very careful how you write, and it demands from you as a writer a kind of simplification, because you cannot mention, for instance, that, for instance, what? Mission porcelain, which will be not understandable for somebody, for the reader from Puerto Rico background and so on. So you have to always think to whom you write, and if you decide to be universal, you have to simplify your writing. This is something dangerous. But from the other side, I remember myself when I took my English friend to the very famous in Poland movie of Andrzej Wajda, Pan Tadeusz, which is our national epos, and Andrzej Wajda filmed it. And this English guy was sitting and he was very happy looking at the movie, and after all I asked him, and what do you think? I was very, moved. And he said, well, with English, well, many beautiful faces, many beautiful ladies, and very handsome guys. But what about these Russians? What are they doing? What are they doing in this film? What's going on? Why they fighting? What they? So then I realized that this is the context, which is very obvious for us. It is totally closed for somebody from the different, not culture, but from the different backgrounds, different contexts. So And I think that Polish literature can be also very close. For instance, they have always problems with translations of Mickiewicz because you have to put footnotes everywhere.